So let's continue with our major question. Why English is a global language? Why not Chinese? Why not Hindu? So actually, we have kept asking these questions. Why English? And there, our textbook author, David Crystal, he offered us two answers. One is socio-cultural answer, and the other is geographical history answer. So far, we have discussed on the socio-cultural answers. So in this perspective, that the English has become a dominant means of communication for the people in global society. In another word, the people have now depend on English for the social and economic well-being. In another word, if you want to practice law, you should study English very hard to reach an excellent level of proficiency. So if you want to be if you want to attend the international global forum, then you should be serious about to learn the standard English. So in another word, English has become essential tools to access the U.S. leadership in every industry, that in every in the international areas of things that affects our daily life, whatever it is, law or media or newspaper and entertainment and sport, you should be serious about learning the standard English. Now, we are now moving on to the next perspective, that is geographical history. So, history account traces the movement of English around the world. When you're thinking about the movement of English, there are also two scopes that we should consider. The first scope is local movement of English. In another word, English was the local language of British people. So, let's get back to the origin of English language. We have talked about when was English was born. As you said, that started the fifth. It started on the 5th century. That English was born with the arrival of the German tribes into British Island. Then you might think that English had remained as a local language only for the British people, then until the 16th century. So in another word, English has remained as the local language for about 10 centuries. So let's think about the start of the first Queen Elizabeth. It was 1603. So it's interesting to find that at that time, there were only 5 or 7 million English speakers in the world. And even more interesting from today's perspective is most of English speakers, they live in Britain. Then let's look at another number. I would say it was 1942, 1952. So that is the start year of the current, the second Queen Elizabeth. So by that time, the number of English speakers jumped to 250 million English speakers. So that means the number of English speakers increased by more than 50 times. Even more interesting is the vast majority of English speakers in the year of 1952 was living outside Britain. So this is a curious reversal of L1 speakers for the global society. So that all started with this voyage. The Britain, the voyage to America, and the voyage to Asia, and the Pacific. And also it is led to the 19th century colonial extension into Africa and the South Pacific. And also 20th century independent states adopt English as the official languages. So so in this regard, we can ask the question, what is the source of English as a global language? English is represented in Asia, in Africa, and the Pacific, and English is represented in every continent, in every island, in Indian Ocean, and Pacific Ocean, and the Atlantic Ocean. This is the source of power, the representation of English in whole continent. And that all started with the British voyage to America. And also it started with the colonial development in Africa and Pacific. When we are talking about the local movement of English, so I mean that when English had long remained as a local language only for the British people, then we can think about 1066 Norman invasion into Britain. As you know, at the time, the French, Norman, they conquered the British soldiers. Then they become the ruler of the British people. So at that time, there was a local movement of English. At that time, English noblemen, they fled to the north. It's currently the Scottish lowland. And English moved within the British. But the major turnaround point has come with the English moved to America. So let's move to how English spread to America. First of all, you might think about 3 expedition teams. The first expedition team was led by Walter Raleigh. It was 1584. So it was unsuccessful. Immediately after they arrived there was a conflict with the native Indians, and they ran out of food and supplies. So they had to went back to Britain, and when they returned to the area, they found that the old settlers, they all disappeared. It still remains a mystery why they disappeared. Then the second expedition team, that was the first successful expedition team in the US, was Jamestown. So it was 1607, that was the first permanent settlement into Jamestown, Virginia, from England. So it's interesting to note that the early colonists who settled in Jamestown, they came from the west of England. And also, what is the third expedition team from England? That was the first successful settlement by Puritans into the Plymouth port, and they came from the east of England. So let's see this picture. So they landed in North Carolina in 1584. There was a conflict with the native people. They shipped back to England, and the settlers disappeared. And this is the second Jamestown settlement from 1607. Then the people, they came from the England's west country. And also the third one, this was the first successful expedition team, and they were actually 35 members of English separatist church with the 67 settlers. They are called the Pilgrim Fathers. They came America with a dream to establish a religious kingdom. So this was the first successful and prosperous settlement by Englishmen. So by 1640, about 2,500 immigrants, they had come here. So this is very linguistically very interesting point that we must know. So the first team, South Virginia, they came from West England. However, the third expedition team who arrived in North Plymouth, they came from East England. So Plymouth colonists from the east of England, such cities like Kent, London, Midland, and this Eastern accent, and they show the Eastern accent that lacking an R sound after vowel. Then how about the Virginia settlement? Many of them came from England's west country. Then R sound is pronounced strongly after vowels. So this is interesting to note. This is 3 expedition team. They had spread into the other part of the America and distinct pronunciation. For example, the northern New England, they were moving to the Great Lakes. And the southerners along the Gulf Coast into Texas. This is the southerners. They moved into the Gulf and the Texas. And how about the Midlanders? The Midlanders spread throughout the Midwestern area to California. And how about the third team that arrived at Plymouth? Then they moved to the Great Lake. So it's interesting that to note that this expedition team came from different parts of England, and the way they pronounce and the way they spoke, they still influence the way the Americans speak according to different regions. So the result is 3 divisions of dialects of America today. There is a southern dialect and the Midland dialect and the south and the north dialect. In the East England accent is north area. So immigrants, the linguistic varieties, very important part of it. So America is the melting pot. American history is the result of a continued inflow of immigrants from different parts of the world. So let's see from 17th century, the immigrants brought a variety of languages. For example, the Quakers from Midlands, they settled Pennsylvania. But let's move on to the 18th century. Then this was the period when the immigrants from Ireland was very active. So for example, in 1720s, 50,000 Irish and Scotch-Irish immigrants, they came to America. And also by 1776, 1 in 7 of the colonial population was Scotch-Irish. So they continued to move inland, so that there is a frontier people with a broad accent. But it was 19th century that the very massive inflow of immigration from European countries that started. And American immigration, because people at that time, the they fled from poverty and famine in Europe. And actually, in European countries at this time, they were not doing well. They were in trouble. So there was a movement to challenges the authority of European government. So Europeans, they thought that there is no hope in Europe. So this is time for us to move to another land. America is emerging as a land of hope, that we can try our life again there. So this is why there was active influx of immigrants into the USA. Especially the Germans and Italians, they came to the America after they failed the 1848 revolution. So this is 18th immigration. For example, the Spanish, they usually used to occupy in the southwest area of the USA, and there were many Dutch in the New York, and the Germans used to occupy in Pennsylvania and its hinterland, and also Africans entering the South in slave trades. So New York, they used to be a city for the Dutch colony, and also there was a very serious potato famine in Ireland, 1840s. Do you know the Irish people used to depend on potato as a mainstay? There was a serious famine, the potato famine, so they couldn't find any food. So millions of Irish people, they were starved to death. So facing such a horrible reality, the Irish people had no other choice. They couldn't stay at home. So they decided to try their life again in the unknown land of America. So there was millions of Irish people who came over to America. And also German and Italian, they had a revolution and they failed, unsuccessful. Their revolution, that was the cause for the German and Italian. They decided to move to America with the American dream to start their life again. So this is the famous word that the huddled masses and the melting pot and the Central European Jews, they fall fleeing from pogroms of the 1880s. So by the time of the 20th century, then English is English in the melting pot country of America, and the seed of conflict begin to grow. We have discussed so far, there is a conflicting desire, conflicting need between two different things. One is the need for the intelligibility, and the other is the need for maintaining the local identity. So every country, every people in the global society, if you are living in Africa or Asia or Latin America, maybe their people, they may have need for intelligibility. Why? Because they want to have a bonding. They want they related with the U.S. leadership or British leadership of economy or press, because they need to comprehend, they need to make themselves understood when they speak English with native speakers like American and British. Because they have they have the need for intelligibility bond with the native speakers. Why we are speaking English? Because we want to communicate effectively with the native speakers and even speakers in the USA or Britain. This is one need for the intelligibility for any people in the global society. On the other hand, however, there is another demand, another need to preserve your local identity. So even if we are speaking English, we don't want to lose Korean accent. We don't want to give up the Korean way of communication. We don't want to make a concession because, as we discussed, Korea has a different culture, so like a high context culture. So the Koreans must be a high context communication style. So when you are speaking English, so we have a Korean way of speaking English. So this is the way that we can preserve our identity as Korean. So these are the two opposite, these are two different needs when you are speaking English. So the seed of conflict begin to emerge in the 19th centuries and 20th century as the English is rapidly growing as the world's global language with the U.S. leadership of economy and business and culture. So, as Bernard Shaw said, the Britain and the United States are two different nations divided by common language. These are the examples. The British no longer, there are many differences between British English and the American English. So if you see the left side of the column, you can see the American English. These are the verbs that only American English use. On the right side of the column, you can see the British English, and these are the words only the British people use. So there is some lexical differences between the two native English, the mother tongue English speakers. The loan, greenhorn, druggist, sick, apartment, baggage, fall, quit. These are the American English that British do not use. On the other hand, there is these words: the land, fire dog, chemist, ill, flat, luggage, autumn, and stop. These are the only British use and the Americans do not use. So let's see how the American English is different from British English. For example, the Americans tend to use new words by adding prefix or suffix. So for example, anti-federalist, anti-Mormon, superstar, superdome, these are the prefix, the super. They are using the prefix to super, and draftee, this is the suffix at the end of the word. Draftee and selectee and rejectee and tranny and receptionist and beautician and mortician and realtor, rock and roller and women's labor, itemize, accessorize, demoralize, and Americanize. These are the Americans only use, and the British do not use. So another example of American English that is different from British English is the American, they tend to prefer the use of contraction. For example, the co-ed is short for the co-educational, and gym is short for gymnasium, and gas is short for gasoline. A movie came from the moving picture, and narc is short for narcotic, and mono came from monophonic, and stereo is short for stereophonic, and sang is short for the ginseng, and pike is short for turnpike, and phone is short for telephone, and coon is short for raccoon, and pop is short for popular music, and Vegas is short for Las Vegas, and Frisco is short for San Francisco, and Nam is short for Vietnam. And also, this is a very unique phenomenon that you can only find in American English. That is the back formation to verb to noun. So that means that there is a noun, then verb is produced from noun. For example, donation is a noun, but from donation there is a new verb, that is donate. And location is a noun, and the American, they made locate. They made locate, the verb that came from the noun location. And also babysitter is a noun, but American, they made the babysit, that is a verb that came from noun babysitter. And also the same is true, they made a housekeeper that came from noun housekeeper. This is the American way of forming verb from noun. So this is the American way of making the verb, but how about reaction from British people? British people would say, wow, donate, locate, babysit, housekeep. That doesn't look beautiful. That looks ugly, and that sounds very awkward. The British would not be pleased with this way of back formation from noun to verb. So in this case, then in my opinion, that Americans tend to be a little bit flexible and practical about the lexicon. From the lexicon point of view, they are willing to make new words from noun. And also, these are the words. The British English, they don't have these words. Why? Because these are the words the Americans, they pick up from the native Indians. So, for example, the smoking a pipe of peace and word paint. For example, she is wearing the word paint. She is wearing a thick cosmetics. And also the Indian fight is standing in a row. And also Indian summer is the weather like today. It's very cold and sunny with the bright sunshine. And also if he play possum, that means that they pretend that he is sleeping or he feigns ignorance. Or bury the hatchet is just to give up weapon, and they just make a peace and they give up fighting. And also go on the war path means we are going to fight. And these are the words the American colonists, they picked up from the native Indians. And also the French left their traces in England. For example, these are the French languages. They found their way into English. For example, the bayou, that is a French language. So that means it's very shallow water, bayou. And also prairie is green grass. And San, Dime, Apache, and Cajun. Cajun means the French descendant. Or Cajun means the Louisiana people. As you know, the Louisiana used to be the land of territory of French for several years in somewhere in 1800. Before Napoleon, Emperor Napoleon, sold the whole Louisiana to American President Thomas Jefferson at the price of $15 million. And also the Spanish there is a lot of Spanish words in English. For example, marijuana, coyote, taco, poncho, hacienda, and adobe, cafeteria, plaza, canyon, and creole. These are the Spanish words that are found now in English, that has become a part of English. And also Dutch. Dutch people left a lot of words in English. So as you said, the Dutch people used to be all the inhabitants of New York, and these are the words, the Dutch English words of Dutch origin. So crow, sleigh, patron, caboose, stoop, span, coleslaw, boss, Yankee, Santa Claus. These are the Dutch words. So let's move on to the second country, the Canada. So who founded Canada first? In 1497, John reached Cabot, Newfoundland, and Canada. There was always conflict between French-speaking people and English-speaking people. Actually, the French people, they were faster than the English-speaking people. So French people was early comer, and English speakers were latecomer. So, however, the French claims were surrendered during the 18th century because the French people were defeated in 2 times war. The first war was the Queen Anne's War, 1702. It defeated first, and also French was defeated in a war with India. That was fatal surrender for the French people. The French people lost its power because then English-speaking power began gaining the power in Canada. But there is another turning point is here. This is 1776, U.S. Declaration of Independence. So the U.S. finally defeated the British, and they become independent, but there was still some Americans who were loyalists to American and British government. They were still loyal to the British government, even though the American became independent. So what was the choice for them? They chose to leave America, and whereas they should go, they decided to go to Canada. Why? Because in Canada, the land is vast, the price is cheap, and nature is beautiful. That is a good alternative for the loyalists, American loyalists, to try their second life in different land. That's why there were a lot of people in East England, in America, they decided to move to Canada. So loyalist supporters of Britain left for Canada. So and also there was another group that is the late loyalists from USA by cheap land. Then coming direct. Then that was the first group of Americans who immigrated to Canada. And then years after, then there was the second group of immigrants who moved to Canada. They came directly from Europe, Irish, or it could be Italian or Europeans. So in Canada, let's see this map of Canada. You can see there is Canadian English region, and also there is another reason. The French is used as a co-official language spoken in Quebec. You can see in this Quebec, this bilingual, French and English are used together. So let's continue to in the next session.